Good day, sir. The topic that I will be discussing is Social Theory of Learning by Etienne Winger. So there will be 4 subtopics, which are a conceptual perspective, theory and practice, communities of practice are everywhere, rethinking learning, and practicality of theory. A conceptual perspective, theory and practice. There are 4 premises to the nature of knowledge, knowing, and knowers. First is that we are social beings. Far from being trivially true, this fact is a central aspect of learning. So, as individuals living in a society, we learn or acquire knowledge through social interactions and such. So, diba, the more we interact with other people, we also gain knowledge from them through observations or like having usual conversations, daily conversations, and such. And second is knowledge is a matter of competence with respect to valued enterprises. So, having knowledge in certain fields or activities can help an individual to do it well than those who do not. It's like they're forte in doing activities that they usually do or in something they're good at. So, kabantay mo, like, the way we do things, like, if mas perminti na to siya buhaton, mas na kanang murag nakabalo na ta like unsay process, like unsay dapat buhaton, murag naanad na ta ana, so mapadali ang atong pagbuhat sa mga activities, mga certain activities. It's because we have knowledge of how we do them. And third, knowledge is a matter of participating in the pursuit of such enterprises, that is, of active engagement in the world. So, the more an individual engage in activities, the more he or she acquires and gain knowledge in such enterprises. So, as what I've said, the more we do things, the more nga perminti nato buhaton ng isa ka butang, the more nga mas kabalo ta kung unsaon siya paghibuhat. And meaning, our ability to experience the world and our engagement with it is meaningful. As a reflection of these assumptions, the primary focus of this theory is on learning as social participation. Participation here refers not just to local events of engagement in certain activities with certain people, but to a more encompassing process of being active participants in the practices of social communities and constructing identities in relation to these communities. So, for instance, there is this certain event or celebration in your community that needs engagement. So, by that means, you can have a conversation or a social interaction with other people, and maka-acquire kag knowledge from them. Like, for example, the things or the practices that needs to be done inside your community. Kung unsay mga dapat buhaton, the rules and regulations in your community, like the practices, mag-acquire nimo na sila nga knowledge through having an interaction with them. So here are the components of a social theory of learning: an initial inventory, learning through practice, community, identity, and meaning. A social theory of learning must therefore integrate the components necessary to characterize social participation as a process of learning and of knowing these components. Meaning, a way of talking about our changing ability, individually and collectively, to experience our life and to the world as meaningfully. So, meaningfully is the learning as experience. Diba we live for a purpose? So, as individuals and as a part of the community, our experiences in life should be meaningful. Practice, a way of talking about the shared historical and mutual engagement in action. It is the learning as doing, the practices that we acquire or that mga practices natin na hibalan through our engagement with other people and community. a way of talking about the social configuration in which our enterprises are defined as worth pursuing. It is the learning as belonging. So, having social interactions with other people, ma-feel nato na we do belong in that community and that are the things that we do are worth pursuing. And identity, a way of talking about how learning changes who we are and creates personal histories of becoming in the context of our communities. It is the learning as becoming. So it's like a growth. Learning really changes who we are. By that means na mas if we learn more things, we acquire knowledge about that certain things that we have learned, and mas kuan ang ato ang identity, like we will have a growth and development. Communities of practice are everywhere. We all belong to communities of practice. At home, at work, at school, in our hobbies. We belong to several communities of practice at any given time, and the communities of practice to which we belong change over the course of our lives. In fact, communities of practice are everywhere. So, 'di ba? Bisag asa ta maadto sa balay, sa eskwelahan, or like even just with we are with our friends, we have certain practices that we usually do. Like for instance, at school, we write, we read, and such things that normal students do in school. Bisan asa ta maadto naa jud tay practices sa communities. There are many practices that we do in our communities, and dili lang na siya, and as we grow older, dili lang na siya like constant, napod na siya changes. As we grow older, naapay changes ang atong mga practices because we engage with different people in our lives. Dili lang pud baya kanang same rang mga tao atong mga ila ma-meet sa atong tibok kinabuhi. Napod bi laylay. So as time passes by, ang ato pong mga practices sa atong palibot is ma-change. Families struggle to establish a habitable way of life. They develop their own practices, routines, rituals, artifacts, symbols, conventions, stories, and histories. So, di ba sa balay naapod tayo atong mga own practices nga ang atong family ra ang nakahibalo, mga butang nga we usually do within our family only, and family members hate each other and they love each other. They agree and they disagree. They do what it takes to keep going. Even when families fall apart, members create ways of dealing with each other. Surviving together is an important enterprise. Whether surviving consists of the search for food and for shelter or of the quest for a viable identity. And a family good, they do everything what it takes to keep the family intact, and that is one of a family's practices. And communities of practice are an integral part of our daily lives. They are so important and so pervasive that they rarely come into explicit focus, but for same reasons they are quite familiar. So, as what I've said kagaina sa practices sa communities, part na siya sa atong daily lives because we live in a certain community, and that means we are part of the community, and we need to know and engage in communities practices because importante na siya sa ato and it is part of us. Rethinking learning. Placing the focus on participation has broad implications for what it takes to understand and support learning. For individuals, it means that learning is an issue of engaging and contributing to the practices of their communities. So, para sa ato, ang pag-engage and the contribution that we can do or we can contribute to our community is learning na siya. the engagements or atong pag-impil-impil sa the practices in our communities is a part of learning. And for communities, it means that learning is an issue of refining their practice and ensuring new generations of members. So sa isa ka komunidad, ang learning daw is refining their practice, doing the practices that a certain community have, and ensuring new generations of members. Like for instance, like mga bagong puyo sa community, and they can maka-learn sila sa bagong nga community nga ilang gipuy-an. It's because the communities refine and ensure the new members of the community. And for organizations, it means that learning is an issue of sustaining the interconnected communities of practice through which an organization knows what it knows and thus becomes effective and valuable as an organization. For instance, the politics, they know the practices in their communities, so kabalo na sila how to keep intact with the communities, the practice, para mas valuable ang ilahang organization. As an organization, they will be valuable if makabalo na sila sa mga practices sa community, and that makes them effective and valuable. Sustain nila ang mga practices sa isa ka community and develop growth as a community as well. Learning in this sense is not a separate activity. It is not something we do when we do nothing else or stop doing when we do something else. So, this means that learning is continuous. Dili lang kay wala tay gibuhat, wala tay na learn. And dili pud pasabot na dili nga wala tay gibuhat. Buhaton nato ang mag-learn pud ta. So it's like di ba continuous ang learning? It is mura siya like gradual steps as time passes by, naatay gradual changes and learnings na atong ma-acquire, knowledge na atong ma-acquire. And learning is something we can assume, whether we see it or not, whether we like the way it goes or not, whether what we are learning is to repeat the past or to shake it off. So, ang learning, ma-assume na gid nato siya sa atong pagbuhat lang og mga ginagmay nga activities. Nakabalo na ta nga naga-learn jud ta bisag dili nato siya makita. Nakabalo jud ta nga nag-learn ta. The practicality of theory. A perspective is not a recipe. It does not tell you just what to do. Rather, it acts as a guide about what to pay attention to, what difficulties to expect, and how to approach problems. So, a perspective is not just a recipe. The way we perceive things, dili lang siya mag-ingon na kung unsay atong dapat buhaton, kung unsay atong dili dapat buhaton. Rather, it is a guide kung unsay atong dapat tagaan og atensyon, unsay mga difficulties na atong i-expect nga mahitabo, and unsaon nato how to deal with our problems, unsaon nato pag-approach sa atong struggles and such. If we believe, for instance, that knowledge consists of pieces of information explicitly stored in the brain, then it makes sense to package this information in well-designed units, to assemble prospective recipients of this information in a classroom where they are perfectly still and isolated from any distraction, and to deliver this information to them as succinctly and articulately as possible. So, di ba we do believe that knowledge are pieces of information that are stored in the brain, and if we we use this in a good way. We use this in a way that makes sense. Like, for instance, we we share our information inside our classroom. For example, expressing our ideas and thoughts in an oral recitation, then without any distraction, and we can say that our knowledge that are the knowledge that I mean the pieces of information that we have in our mind, our brain, will be delivered thoroughly within the class. A social theory of learning is therefore not exclusively an academic enterprise. While its perspective can indeed inform our academic investigations, it is also relevant to our daily actions, our policies, and the technical, organizational, and educational systems we design. So, di ba, in our sa ato, we have this notion na learning is just um it only involves in academic enterprise, like sa school lang, sa school lang ta maka-learn, but dili na siya ang ana. We also can have learning in our daily actions, our policies sa mga organizations, and the things that surrounds us, the people are in our communities. We can also learn from them, and so that means that we can acquire learning. Biological, neurophysiological, cultural, linguistic, and historical developments that have made our human experience possible. Neurophysiological theories focus on the biological mechanism of learning. They are informative about physiological limits and rhythms, about issues of stimulation and optimization of memory processes. So the neurophysiology of learning involves the three main cognitive processes, of which the most important is the information processing system. The information processing system is the process through which brain learn and remember information through attention, perception, and short-term memory. So, the information processing system is the process in which our brain, ang information na atong na-acquire, na-learn through our attention, our social interaction, perception, atong pagsabot sa things, will be stored in our brain. And then behaviorist theories focus on behavior modification via stimulus, response pairs, and adaptive response. So this is our response to our behavior, our response to things, to if like atong response if we are socializing or interacting with other people. Cognitive theories focus on internal cognitive structures. The pedagogical focus is on the processing and transmission of information through communication, explanation, recombination, contrast, interference, and problem solving. So cognitive theories involves the transmission of information that we have acquired and learned through our communication, our social interaction with people, the interference, and through problem solving, whereas constructivist theories focus on the process by which learners build their own mental structures when interacting with an environment. Their pedagogical focus is task-oriented. They favor hands-on, self-directed activities oriented towards designs and discoveries. So, constructivist theories involves the building relationships with other people, the people around them, their interactions in the environment, and the activities that they have engaged through having social interactions with the community. Social learning theories take social interactions into account, but still from a primarily psychological perspective. They place the emphasis on interpersonal relations involving imitation and modeling, and thus focus on the study of cognitive process by which observation can become a source of learning. So, diba as we observe if we are kanang perminti taga-uban anang a person, maka-learn ta sa ilang, like for example, their habit. Masundog nato ang ilang habit. Ma-learn nato ang ilang mga kasagaran ginabuhat kay tungod lagi we are always with them. Ma-learn na po nato ang mga things na they usually do, ma-imitate nato through our observation, or sometimes just through by being with them. Maka-learn ta sa ilang mga things na ilang ginabuhat. So my second topic would be transitional learning and reflexive facilitation, the case of learning for work by Danny Wildemarsh and Verti Strabantz. The subtopics are between reflexive and restrictive activation, transitional learning, the four basic strategies, adaptation, growth, distinction and resistance, stimulation, challenge, redesign and reconstruction, remarks and nuances, an educational perspective on transitional learning, meaningful connections and activation strategies, the case of FlexiJob. 10 years ago, researchers had a research that involves the interpretation of process of transitional learning that takes place in the context of various education, training, and guidance practices, mostly in support of people who have difficulty in finding or in keeping a job. One of the outcomes of their research is a framework that helps to interpret the changing conditions of individual learning process and educational practices against the background of transformation in present-day society. According to Alhit, Fisher, Rochenthal, and Vista, reflexive biographies not only may allow people to adapt to rapidly evolving conditions, singularize answers to the changing conditions, and to influence the social context, whereas to Bauman, this theory of transitional learning will be helpful to support the decision-making process of the reflexive professional whose role is said to be dramatically shifting today from a position of legislator to a position of interpreter. Between reflexive and restrictive activation. In 1998, the first international research project on the education, training, and guidance of unemployed young people was started by Wildemarsh in 2001. Wrote a book about their observations. They noted significant shifts in social policy discourses, an emphasis on active citizens, active job seekers, active senior citizens, and active communities, and the active welfare state has become prominent in social policy discourses all across Europe. Furthermore, reflective activation implies the need to balance respect for the singularity of young adults on the one hand with the needs and demand of the labor market on the other hand. So in 1991, Wildemarsh he nag-research siya about sa Europe about the job seeking of citizens in their communities, and reflective activations implies the need to balance respect for the singularity of young adults with the demand and labor of the market on the other hand. So, di ba like na ay mga workers na mga young adults niya, ang ilang trabaho is like not appropriate for their age, dili siya appropriate sa ilahang edad, like dili dapat na nila trabaho, but ilan lang trabaho kay wala sila choice, and it is the demand of the labor market. Transitional learning. Screwband's in 2001 research project focused on biographical learning processes in which women make sense of work through the construction of their life courses and their life stories. We researched the way women learn to handle the different and changing meanings of work in their lives and in overall society. Throughout the research process, we began to understand that the real job women perform during their life is the reconstruction of the self in their relation to society, according to Fenwick and Rossiter and Tennant. However, finding a job attuned to their own capacities and personal and social aspirations on the one hand, and to the demands and structures of the labor market on the other hand, is not taken for granted. So the focus of Screwband's research is on women, involves the of how women handle their works in society and in their lives. So, di ba, as women, dili lang ang atong trabaho is not only one. We are not only just women. Dili lang ta naa sa balay nga isa ra ka trabaho as housewife. We also have work outside in the society outside our house. So we are that flexible in terms of working, and the research of Scrubans focus on that. And throughout the research process, sa ilang pag-research about how women handle their works, they understand that the real job women perform in sa ilang kinabuhi is the reconstruction of the self in relation to society. It is the building of their self through working in the society. Transitional learning and meaningful connections. Transitional learning emerges when individuals are faced with unpredictable changes in the dynamics between their life course and the transforming context, and when they are confronted with the need to learn, anticipate, handle, and reorganize these changing conditions. In line with Al-Hayt, we refer to this lifelong process of shaping one's own biography as a process of transitional learning. So, an example with this would be the pandemic. Diba? During the pandemic, we have the transitional learning, which is having our online class and modular learning. We have the transitional learning. We individuals we faced unpredictable changes, like the culture shock na wala ta naanad sa mga na ingana ang mga buhatonon. Our life changes, ang flow sa atong pag-learn sa education and all, they had changed, and by that we really struggled a lot because wala ta naanad na ingana ang atong pangbuhaton, and we students, we learn, we handle, and we anticipate this challenge with ourselves. We have self-learning, and we have self-learning, and we handle the challenges alone. While transitional learning refers to a permanent learning process, meaningful connections are its varying and concrete stakes and possible outcomes at a specific moment. This process of creating meaningful connection is not a process that is located in the person. The telling of a story, who one is, where one stands, where one goes to, is always a response to a question coming from someone else. So, transitional learning is not only focused on the first person, but also with having meaningful connections with other people as well. 4 combined strategies: stimulation, challenge, redesign, and reconstruction. Stimulation is the first combined strategy operating within the given opportunity structures by attuning societal and personal demands. It tries to meet the changing needs produced by society and transformation on the one hand, adaptation, and to take individual orientations into consideration, growth on the other. Challenge as a second combined strategy. Challenge equally related to the tension between societal and personal demands. So, an example with this would be as a single mother. Ang iyang hobbies, like nursery hobbies, or like likings of flowers, and in order to applicable ang iyahang hobby or will be useful, she have it's like nagtukod siya yung own flower shop that is aligned with her likings, and it will money related activity na maka-gain pa siya income just by doing the things that she like. For example, building her own flower shop, it's because she likes flowers. That is an example of the stimulation and challenge. Redesign is situated on the borderline of two opposing perceptions concerning the transformability of opportunity structures and is preoccupied exclusively with the meeting of personal demands. And reconstruction is about the re-establishment of practices based on a critical resistance and yet pragmatic and realistic adaptation, perception of opportunity structures under moral and political dimensions. Reconstruction runs the risk of turning a blind eye to the individual perspective of the issues at stake. So, as what I've said earlier, the stimulation challenge is like magasunod na siya, and it's like paras but sa redesign and reconstruction. Redesign is when, for example, you have a job na dili kaganahan and you also want to have a certain job na like gusto nimo and the like, so like murag wala nagka-coincide imong gusto and sa labor market, and you have a growth, the reconstruction, in which gi gi imuhang gi mas gipili nimo ang imuhang gusto, imong individual perspective kaysa sa katong demand sa labor market. So murag ang kung unsa imong gusto, mas mo imong gipili nga trabaho kaysa atong need nimo nga trabahoon, or like the opportunity that was given to you, like your job. Meaningful connections through adult and continuing education, an educational perspective and transitional learning. In many, often surprising and changing ways, adult and continuing education initiatives, amongst other media, are often considered helpful for the process of transitional learning that they experienced. The participants in this research on women and work attended several educational and counseling activities, thereby inevitably giving personal meaning of their learning from a biographical and situated perspective. They more or less believed in education as a means of responding to the demands of the labor market and of society in transformation. If education fails to do so, it still retains relevancy for the sake of personal growth and self-development, or as a means of helping to design a proper lifestyle or to construct alternative ways of being employed. So here, women believe that education is like a respond lang siya sa demand sa atong labor market, because we live in a society. In order to transform and develop and have growth in our society, we must be able to work and related in education and according to the demands of the labor market. If dili, we won't have a personal growth and self-development. It may, or as a means of help, it's like we just help. Education helps to have a proper lifestyle and a growth in our society by being employed. Meaningful connections and activation strategies. The case of flexi job. The theory of transitional learning can also be of interest from a facilitation point of view, as the entire framework is not limited to the perspective of the learner. It is also applicable to the activities of professionals of education, training, guidance, and counseling who try to support individual learning processes. So the theory of transitional learning is wala lang siya. It's not only for about the entire learner, but also it is also applicable sa activities of professionals like in education, training and guidance and counseling, who are supporting the individual learning processes of an individual. FlexiJob is a fictitious name for a social employment agency in Belgium. The agency had the ambition to create a connection between the life world of disadvantaged young people and the present-day situation of the labor market. FlexiJob wants to support the young unemployed adults in their attempt to alternate periods of leisure and employment. The concept of FlexiJob is based on the principle that short-term jobs, which is 1 to 30 days, should be offered to this particular group. These jobs are supposed to encourage young adults who want an income but are not motivated to subject themselves to regular labor market discipline. It promises a combination of work, freedom, and of stability and some sort of nomadic lifestyle. FlexiJob wants to support these young adults in experimenting with new ways of life that reflect their culture of resistance. So, FlexiJob is There's this certain agency in Belgium that helps young adults to find jobs that are appropriate for them, like gusto nila na jobs, since some of them don't like the jobs that are being offered to them. For example, short-term jobs that not 1 to 30 days ra. Dapat kana siya nga trabaho is mahatag na siya sa particular young adults na gusto og income, pero dili gusto og long-term jobs. It's like morala siya part-time job bitaw na gusto ra kag income, pero di ka gusto mo trabaho og dugay. And it's like giving you a work and a freedom and stability at one time, and a nomadic lifestyle. It supports the young adults in experimenting with new ways of life that reflect their culture of resistance. Kung unsay gusto nila nga trabaho is mahatag sa ila, without them being pressured. Conclusion. The cases that have presented based on different research experiences make clear how such practice can be inspired by emerging theories, both on transitional learning and reflexive activation. Such theories can be an important basis for reflection, dialogue, and decision making among practitioners and policymakers, and within the organizations that provide education, training, and guidance. And that ends my discussion. Thank you for listening. I am Lera Morada from Section F1 of EDUC 101.